Hey Ralph, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Yvonne. How about you?
Oh, I'm just so excited to be here.
I am too, especially with our guest today. It doesn't get any better than this. I mean, you talk about somebody who has been around the workers' comp system for a really long time, still talking, writing about it, teaching us all the details of it. Just a remarkable human being.
That's right. We've got Bill Zachry today. And for those of you that don't know Bill Zachry, he really is a treasure. I learned and well, I met him years ago and learned about his story. He came into the workers' comp system as an injured worker. So he has a really unique perception and perspective of the system. And he has got lots of experience, understands the system more deeply than I think anybody does. There's only a couple other people I can think of that really have the depth of knowledge that he does.
He really is. Again, because he's seen it from all angles
Mm-hmm.
and so deeply experienced in the multiple changes of the California workers' comp system. He's been such an integral component of each of those bills and the legislative changes that have gone on that he really has a unique perspective about California law.
So today we're talking about the nuances of California and the workers' compensation system there. We get pretty deep pretty fast, but I think it's still going to be an interesting conversation for you.
It's always fun. Looking forward to it.
All right, here we go. Let's go talk to Bill. Hello, Ralph. How are you?
I'm doing great, Yvonne. How about you? What you been up to?
Oh, this and that. You know me, staying busy.
Always. I know that for sure.
Always. And we're so happy. Hello, Bill. Bill Zachry. Thank you for joining us today.
Delighted to be with you too. Thank you very much for inviting me. I always enjoy spending time with you too.
Thank
Same.
you. And we feel the same.
Yeah.
So, Bill, today I think I was sharing with you as we were planning, this season we're breaking down, we're going back to our original thought process of breaking down the workers' compensation system into bite-sized chunks, a little bit each episode. So hopefully by the end of the season, people have a much better understanding of this vast and complex system of ours that we all love and enjoy being in. So today we are going to talk about with you sort of summarizing the California workers' compensation system. We've already shared on a number of our episodes about, each state has its own set of rules and regulations, which is part of why the system is so complex. So today we're going to focus on California, and we really appreciate you helping us tackle that challenge.
Delighted to be here and talk a little bit about that. It's fascinating that actually all the benefits start out as the same. You have medical care, you have temporary disability, you have permanent disability. Some have return to work processes. You have death benefits, and those are the basic benefits out of the workers' comp system. And yet you have 53 or 54 different systems once you start including the various federal systems. And it's a fascinating process in terms of how they are so different, even though you have the underlying basics is all the same.
That's right. So before we dive in, I want our listeners who don't know you, I can't imagine people that don't know you, but for those that don't know you, let's give a little background on who you are and how you came to be in the comp system.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on that. In the last few years, I was the board member of the State Compensation Insurance Fund. I was there for 15 years. That overlapped quite a bit, actually, with my time as the Group Vice President of Risk Management over at Safeway, where I got Risk Manager of the Year. I was involved with legislation and regulations here in the state of California, actually nationwide. And as you already know, my introduction to workers' compensation was as an injured worker. I got stabbed at work and I took out my spleen. And for me, workers' compensation has always been sort of very personal in terms of the nice thing about workers' comp is that it is and should be the safety net for somebody who does get injured at work. And the very, very nice thing about the comp process, if you will, if you really do a great job of taking care of the injured worker, it provides a lower cost for the employer, and it's the right thing to do for the injured workers. So that's pretty important for me.
Thank you. And so, Ralph, when we talk about somebody who's seen and done it all, I think Bill is a fine example of that. You've seen it from the inside out, and you've played some really important roles in this and continue to do so. So again, this is not your first time you've been on our show, so thank you for coming back. Anything to add, Ralph, before we dive in?
Love you, Bill. Man, you really are. You're something special. We learn from you all the time. Your incredible experience. You are truly one of our smartest folks in this industry and somebody that we learn from every day. So I'm really, really grateful and appreciative you doing this with us.
Well, Ralph, one of the nicest things about my experience within the comp system is the people that you meet and the time you get to spend with them, such as you two. So I really, we can spend the next hour or two talking about how great each other is, right? And so, but
I like it. An hour or two. That's my flavor right there.
Well, I can take care of that, no problem. But you really want to talk about the California system, don't you?
We do. So let's dive into that. And so let's start wherever you like. I would like for us to talk about today, in the short time that we have, sort of explaining the nuts and bolts of what makes California special in terms of a workers' compensation system. So I'm going to let you.
So California is the 6th largest economy in the world, not just a state, but in the world. And it's a huge population. It has got a huge economy, and the workers' compensation system is a vital part of that. One of the interesting parts about the workers' compensation system in California is that we certainly run differently than any other state. And one of the biggest problems that is out there is that, according to the California Insurance Rating Bureau, it takes about 48 cents to deliver $1 of benefit in California, whereas the median, I think, is about half of that. And so that's a tremendous expense in the system. But the way it works, and the reason for that is, I think, obvious when you look at how the process works. One is we have apportionment that a lot of the other states don't have. And so we also have a very, very low threshold of compensability for claims. I think you had Robert Raspon, and Robert's, one of his great quotes is just a iota of exposure and you end up with a compensable claim here in California because of the cumulative trauma concepts that they have here. So what happens is you have the applicant's attorneys subpoenaing records, which is very expensive, and getting a lot of med legal reports, which will add body parts. And at the same time, you have the defense subpoenaing records as well, and trying to get medical apportionment that, again, is not recognized in most of the other states. And that is those are many of the factors that add up to creating a high level of expense. When the California Workers' Comp Institute publishes some of its reports, it'll tell you that we 3 times the number of indemnity claims have permanent disability than any other state in the nation. And so this is part of the process that if the average claims cost is not as expensive, but once you get the kind of volume we're talking about, you have a very significant cost to the system. And so I think, as I understand it, Alaska and Hawaii are more expensive on a per state basis. And then you have, for instance, Illinois is more expensive on a medical per claim basis. But when you add it all up in California, you end up with a very, very high expense rate. And that's problematic. And so that's the beginning of the issues that go with California. We had a system that was completely out of control before Governor Schwarzenegger was in office. The average employer cost was $6.75 per $100 of payroll. And then he passed SB 899, which is, I think, the bill you can see over my left shoulder. It's on there. I was in the room helping negotiate that bill. And we brought the claims costs from $6.75 down to $1.67.
Wow.
And then it started percolating up again. And then we passed another bill in 2013, brought it back down to $1.65. And it's been percolating around there pretty consistently ever since then. So over my shoulder, you can see 2 of the bills that we got passed. I was in the room, helped negotiate those. And it was a fascinating experience to be able to try to make sure that the system works well for the employers as well as for the injured workers. Both of those bills actually significantly increased benefits and permanent disability to the injured workers. And but it's been very, very steady ever since then in terms of the cost. We're seeing a uptick in claims severity, as it's called, with the expense of the claims. According to the Rating Bureau, they're going up. On the other hand, to offset that a little bit has been a reduction in claims frequency. So the overall claims costs have remained pretty steady for the last, since 2013 to today's date, which is a long time for a system to remain steady. And so that's part of the big picture of what goes on in California.
Is that it? Is that a wrap?
Well, that's not quite a wrap. We have other things that are going on that are a disaster, actually. And back in the 1920s, when you had injured people coming back from the World War I, most states put in something called the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund program. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was to protect the employer and encourage them to hire people with disabilities. One example of that, for instance, is in the current permanent disability rating system, loss of one eye is 20%, loss of two eyes is 100% permanent disability. Well, if you're an employer and they lose the second eye, you don't want to end up with 100% permanent disability. You would think that they would only have 20. And the idea behind the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund makes a lot of sense in terms of that employer should only pay the 20, and then who else is going to pay the rest? Well, that was the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund. And for years and years, it percolated along with a very, very small expense. There are now systems and processes that have some folks are abusing the system, as well as the low threshold process is creating a significant exposure. And so in the last few years, the California system has exploded. By the way, because the laws were put in place in many states protecting people with disabilities, the need for the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund really went away for most of the United States. I think 26 states completely got rid of the whole program. Mm. And most states don't currently, some didn't have it to begin with. So most states don't have that, but California is usually an anomaly when these comes to these kinds of things. And so currently this last assessment, I'll give you some math here. The last assessment was about $880 million. Mm-hmm. That was set out in November of last year. A year prior to that, it was $440 million. And then about 2015 or 16, it was about, I think, 15 or 20 million. So you can just see how it's exploded. If you look at the incurred but not reported claims, in other words, the claims that haven't really been filed for yet, I think you're looking at a $1.6 billion system next year, which is over the top, very expensive. Right now at $880 million, I think it's about $44 per a tax, if you will, for lack of a better description, per citizen of California. And it'll double and then double again, looking at the current projections for where the costs are going to go. And right now, one of the problems that has existed with this is it is currently owned by the Department of Industrial Relations, administered by the California Division of Workers' Comp, and they have to go through the normal California budget process when asking for claims adjusters. And part of the problem you run into, even though this system is user funding and the assessments go straight against the employers, to get staffing in order to oversee this has to go through the state budget. When the state is having a budget problem, there's a tendency not to hire enough people. And I do not know the exact claims load, but I've heard it's as high as 900 claims per claim.
Oh my goodness.
Which is impossible to.
It's not possible.
To really do any defense. And so they're not necessarily setting up defense evaluations or deposing the injured workers to find out if they really are disabled and things like that. Now, for legitimate people, it makes some sense to have a safety net and projection. But right now, if you don't have any defense going on, that's one of the problems. And then you have another process is there is some fraud going on with some of the photocopy services basically subpoenaing records that may have nothing at all to do with this, but there's an exchange going on between, as I understand it, what I've heard from several SIU people, and I have not seen this personally, but this is what I've heard, so it's a rumor, is that some photocopy companies are offering and paying for the document management system for law firms in exchange for allowing to do a lot of photocopying that really doesn't have anything to do with anything with regards to these claims. And yet the bills go through, and because there's no defense going on, they get paid. Plus the med legal process in California is $3 a page. That for the doctors to review that as part of their med legal evaluations. And if you took your entire life's medical history, subpoenaed every single record, you get up to 45,000 pages. You're now looking 45 times 3 as the med legal expense. And then you'll have 1 or 2 different doctors doing that. And now you're starting to see why it's so expensive.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. You just went over a lot of stuff in a short amount of time.
Want more math?
No, not just, let's just put the pause button for a second. So I want to back up a little bit. So I want to go back to some of the numbers you talked about. So you said we're currently sitting at $880 million. That's what we spend on the workers' comp. That's the workers' comp expenditure in the state of California.
Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund assessment.
Okay. And you saying that that's going to double again by next year?
Yes.
Okay. So that is a lot. So there's a lot of expenses. That part is clear. And so why do we see, how did that happen? So you talked about this rumor, as you put it, of copy services, subpoenaing and requesting all these copies.
It's not just the copy service companies. What is happening now is the way the system was designed originally is the payments are made once a week. Mm-hmm. And the attorneys only get a small percentage of what's being paid to the injured worker. And most attorneys back in the day used to think, well, it's not worth the time and effort. But if you have a huge volume, it becomes a life annuity kind of thing, because every week you get more revenue. And so lately at the applicants' attorneys meeting, there have been more and more efforts to identify potential people and run them through the system. And since there's no defense, almost 100% of the people who apply end up getting benefits, which, 100% of the people are not 100% disabled. Mm-hmm. Routine. And by the way, the difference in cost in the system was, if somebody this only applies for people who are greater than 70% permanent disability to begin with. Secondarily is that you're actually paying for non-industrial disability associated with the industrial disability. And another piece of the puzzle is that the way the system works, if you will, is that when most larger claims are being adjudicated, even the defense will say, well, we'll agree to this amount of permanent disability, now go get more money from the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund. And so on an individual basis, that makes sense, but on the aggregate, it really ends up being a tremendous cost for the employers of California.
Absolutely. And Ralph, I know your wheels are spinning, so jump in here.
Yep, my wheels are spinning for sure. So Bill, and it makes sense. The population, the number of workers in the state of California, 3, 4, 5 times the amount, right, of even the largest states out there. I mean, you could probably group 5, 6, 7 different states and still not come up with the number of workers in the state of California. I say all of that because that begins to explain very nicely why the system costs so much more. There's just more volume, period. Right?
Well, part of it's the volume, but part of it is the question of, do we really need a system that pays for non-industrial disabilities when most of the other, because the original intent behind this was 1920s to protect people who had pre-existing disabilities, make sure that they got hired. That need has gone away to some extent. And, there is no defense going on right now. And we've been talking with the Division of Workers' Comp to encourage an increased focus on defense, and they certainly are talking about doing that. But currently, there has not been a lot of defense that's gone on.
Totally agree with you, right? So I'm going to break it down basics here because we may have folks that just got started in comp here. So you're right. The original system covers accidents in the course and scope, and therefore injuries that are related to that accident. Somewhere along the line, in order to protect folks with pre-existing medical conditions, which with a combination of, right, the workers' comp injury itself made it more difficult for these folks to be able to return back to work.
Well, the original part of this process, frankly, was that in the 1920s, in order to encourage employers to hire people with disabilities, this was put in place.
Yep.
And you're right about the size of California. You know, let's talk about, I think Alaska has 800,000 people in it. The whole state, I think, somewhere around there. City and county, San Francisco have about the same amount, right?
I was going to say, you have that in a couple of blocks over there, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, I mean, yeah, it's a large state, but it's not just the large state. It's this particular process and system that is, I think, being abused by some of the providers in the system, and as well as you need to have. I think legitimately injured workers should get all the benefits and all the medical treatment and everything you can possibly get. But we're talking about a system that is paying for non-industrial disabilities. And the idea behind this is combined with the industrial, what does it create kind of routine. But the PD system is supposed to take care of that. So
it's a nice explanation for folks out there who always question, why is California so much more expensive?
That's just one example of why we're so much more expensive. And then the other thing that really makes us expensive is what's called the cumulative trauma system. And in California, you have a concept that somebody who has worked for any period of time will have experienced a cumulative trauma claim. And as Judge Rasp politely and accurately comments, you just need an iota of experience. And so literally people who have had 1 or 2 days of work now have this alleged exposure to cumulative trauma. Now, there might not be a lot of permanent disability, but you do not apportion medical care and you do not apportion temporary disability out. And so in California, you also have another group of people who file what are called PFIN claims, post-employment apt first notice claims. And so here's more math on cumulative trauma. Last I knew from the Rating Bureau, we're looking at about 18 to 20% of all the claims have an alleged cumulative trauma injury in it. Of that, probably 8 to 10% of the total indemnity claims are post-employment apt first notice claims. And these are claims where cappers will go through low income areas, offer free medical care. They don't say it's workers' comp. This is pure fraud, by the way. Have people sign up. There was a case that just came out where Ascension Legal was a phone bank in Tijuana, Mexico, taking the 800 number phone calls and then signing people up for workers' compensation. And so you would then, these people were getting paid to send them to the attorney was paying money for the referral. The med-legal doctors were paying money for referral. The photocopy companies were paying money for the referrals. The translation services and transportation services were all paying these fraudsters money. And this is still going on. It's a significant percentage of the claims here in California. And it's geographically located down primarily in Los Angeles basin, with a little bit in some of what's called the Inland Empire. And it's been filtering out a little bit towards Bakersfield. It's not gone into Northern California that I know of too much yet, although there was an attempt by some of these groups in the Napa Valley in the last year and a half that I believe they've been trying to do these kinds of things.
This is not the first time that we have heard problems of this kind, particularly focused in the LA basin. So over the years that I've been in the comp system, I've heard of many elaborate fraud schemes. So That's definitely part of the issue in the state. But as we're getting near the time where we're going to have to wrap up, what are some other specific nuances about California that you think people should know and take away from this episode?
Well, in part of the Reform Act, I think one of the positive things we did is we took medical decisions away from non-medical professionals. And I think that was a positive thing. So we have what's called utilization review and independent medical review. And part of the abuse prior to the Schwarzenegger bill was the fact that without any limitations, the doctors abused the system severely. And by requiring them to follow evidence treatment guidelines, I think this has improved the quality of care as well as controlled some of the costs for the employers of the state of California. And that's been a very positive thing. So you have a system that is focused on providing the right care at the right time. Doctors are still complaining about some of the friction points that come out of that, and I don't blame them. On some of the more chronic cases, you do have a little more problem in terms of the treatment, but generally speaking, for the majority of the claims, it's significantly improved the quality of care and significantly helped us get people well and get them back to work, kind of thing. So that's been one other thing before we go that I really like to hit on is that one of the things that I believe is very important is getting the patient engaged in their recovery. And I think, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been talking about the industry doing what's called injured worker advocacy. And for me, the next stage of advocacy, frankly, is this. Engagement is the next level of advocacy. If we can get these injured workers engaged in their recovery, involved in and making informed decisions in terms of the kinds of treatment they get, the outcomes significantly improve. And so I think that's one of the positive things that we have to focus in on going forward is engagement and making that the next level of advocacy.
I agree. That's something that we firmly believe in here at Institutes of Health. Ralph, anything else?
We could really go days and days, right, breaking this down, Bill, because you're absolutely right. Having professionals that are not trained in medical to decide medical issues made no sense. And you guys were the first in the country to say, we're going to take that medical decision-making, put it over here where medical professionals are making the decision. I mean, I'm glad to see and hear from you that part of the bill has worked.
Well, Ralph, my second day on the job, my supervisor as a claims adjuster, threw 4 files at me, says, call the doc and let him know whether or not you approve or disapprove of the surgery. And I had pretty much flunked physiology in high school, and that was my entire medical experience. This is stupid, right? What do I know? And then years later, during the worst of the abuse on the part of the physicians, I sat next to a presiding judge from Stockton at the time, and he goes, I've never made a medical decision in my life. And I thought to myself, either you did great drugs in the 60s and are having a flashback, or I am, because I have seen you say, yes, we had to do the 7th or 8th unnecessary back surgery. And as far as I was concerned, that was a medical decision. And so I think, one of the goals was to get medical decisions being made by medical professionals. And I think we were pretty good about doing that.
Bill, I love that because we've all been there. At one point, does he need that, L5S1 surgery? Well, my law degree doesn't help me very much with this medical situation. I'll go to the medical experts and the medical school to be able to figure out what's the answer to that. So, I know that it's counterintuitive, right? To take a big portion, perhaps the biggest portion of the comp world decision-making, medical, and yank it away from what we've traditionally given the decision makers, right? But it makes all sense in the world when you talk about it in the sense that you've brought to the table.
It made all the sense in the world because, I wouldn't want my personal philosophy as a claims person, as a VP of claims, a risk manager, whatever, was that I would want a system that I would be comfortable in my children getting the care out of this system. I would want the same docs. I want to be able to have the comfort level that they're getting the best care possible, right? And as the risk manager at Safeway, I wanted my coworkers to get the right kind of care. And what I didn't want was non-medical professionals making medical decisions on whether yes or no. And that was an important part of the process going forward.
Love it.
Well, one thing we didn't talk about, and I think we should at least mention it and talk about it for a minute or two, we haven't talked about utilization review in that process. That's a pretty big part of the process here in California, right?
Well, the utilization review was the doctors are supposed to request treatment that is evidence-based treatment guidelines, and part of the utilization review, independent medical review, if the original review is denied, then it goes up to what's called IMR, independent medical review. And right now, the IMR process, well in the upper 90s of all the treatment that's requested is approved. And the stuff that's denied, though, really should have been and needs to be denied because it's the wrong care. Although one of my favorite little anecdotal stories that everybody got up in arms over is that one of the URIMR processes denied, believe it or not, denied an aspirin. And it costs about $125 or $200 to do a URIMR process, right? And you think, well, this is stupid. Why would you spend that money? Well, the answer is that patient was already on other drugs, and the aspirin would have destroyed that person's kidneys. And so you actually want to have quality care, and you want to make sure that even though the doctor's prescribing something, that it's really the right kind of care that will help the patient. And I really think that was a great use of URIMR, even though it was only how much is one aspirin? Very, very little cost, right? But
it depends on in what system is it getting paid, I think.
Well, that's a different issue. But the bottom line here is this, and that is that you want the right care so that you're not going to have this person's kidneys destroyed, right? Sure. And doing the right care means that you need to have it. And that ties in with a whole nother problem of in many of the systems in the United States, you don't have an overlap of the group health information with the workers' comp information. And we can spend it. That's a system problem that needs to be solved because you want to know what other drugs they're on when you're prescribing aspirin. You want to know these things because if you don't, if the patient doesn't tell you, oh, by the way, I'm on this drug, which would counterindicate aspirin, then you're going to end up with medical problems. And then if he'd taken the aspirin, that would have resulted in a kidney replacement or, dialysis or whatever it is. It would have been very, very expensive and very bad for the injured worker.
Absolutely. So, Bill, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today?
I think we've covered pretty much the issues. California certainly is unique, and it drives people crazy in terms of when they try to get involved here because it is so different than many of the other states. The system costs are going up, and I think there's going to certainly be. There already is a bill out there about the Subsequent Injuries Benefit Trust Fund. There's some other bills. The med legal process can certainly be tweaked and improved. I think there's all the United States needs what's called QA, QC, quality assurance, quality control with regards to the med legal process. And I think that one of the appropriate and consistent complaints that most of the doctors have in workers' compensation is they get very little accurate, timely feedback. And my joke is if you try to drive up and down the 101 freeway with your eyes closed, how far would you get? And we're asking the doctors to do this with their eyes closed because they never get feedback. Yeah. So these are opportunities to really make the system work better. And it's one of the things that I'm trying to work with many of my friends and other people in the comp system here in California to try to let's create a process that will give the doctors feedback. Let's do some other things that'll make an ability to be a better, accurate determination of compensability or a faster automated process for approving treatment when it really should be provided. One last thing in terms of numbers, if you will. My experience, not necessarily everybody else's experience, is this. The top 51% of the claims account for about 10% of my dollars. So you have all the little medical only claims and everything that goes. And you need a process that will get out of the way, let the doctors do what they do and let them do the treatment. And now the top 3% of the claims used to be quads, paras, burns, head injuries, amputations, things like that. At Safeway in 15 years, I had one head injury and none of the other things. And yet my severity was going up. And part of that was the litigation process. Part of that was a lot of other things. But what I found out is that in the top 3%, it was actually the at-risk employee who had had adverse childhood experiences ended up having the majority of the very, very severe claims. And this is what I call sisterhood of the traveling body part injury claims. For most claims adjusters who have done any claims adjusting, they'll know what I'm talking about, because it starts out as the right hand, and next thing you know, they have the person totally disabled, and you go, what in the heck happened here? Sisterhood of the traveling body part injury claims. And what I found out in doing my study was that most of these people that had adverse childhood experiences at Safeway, we did a process that we called these people at 2 weeks, talked to them, and found out if they were at risk. And if they were, then we intervened with counseling and support, reduced our claims cost by 40%. And yet, not a lot of that's still being done in the industry. And it could be, because we need to take great care of these people, do the right thing, figure out what's driving it, and then intervene appropriately.
Well, I would like to have a whole series of conversations around that right there, because as Ralph said earlier, we could take any one of the topics we decide to dive into on this podcast, and we could really have a month's worth of podcasts, about the topic and not cover it all. But so I'm doing a lot of educational sessions right now, and we talk about this at IOH of, what you're talking about is identifying the psychosocial barriers that exist. Right. And managing them early on. And I'm telling you, I feel like I'm a parrot. I know that we've been talking about this in the workers' compensation system for a very long time. So in another episode, not too far in the distant future, I'd really love to dive into that conversation with a few of you that I know we can have a really deep conversation.
The person who really helped us implement this was Denise Algier. Yeah. And she published a study that showed that the claims costs were reduced by 40%. It was pretty remarkable in terms of the impact that this has. Our pilot program, we had 82 people identified at risk. We intervened with the counseling and support, 0 litigation, 82 people back to work, two back surgeries. In California, that's unheard of. And yet I don't understand why this is not done everywhere. Yeah. Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, so on another point I'll point out, and I'll drop in the show notes, is that so Denise is very a key participant and driver of the rising benchmarking study that is continuing on, an annual study every year. I read it every year, and I refer to that pretty much like a Bible. I go to it for points that I'm going to talk about or drive in my educational sessions, because there's so much good substantive information in that study that comes out every year. So, Ralph, any final questions before we let Mr. Zachry go?
Bill, average weekly wage in California, higher than the norm around the country? I'm assuming the answer to that is yes.
The average weekly wage is somewhat higher. Well, the average weekly wage is somewhat higher in the state of California. The payment or the temporary disability rate is 2/3 between a minimum and maximum. The maximum tends to go up a little bit, but it's not that is not really the driving force of the cost in the state of California. It's the medical by far is the most expensive benefit in the system.
And just a little tiny on that. So is it, the per visit fee, what is it about California medical pricing that tends to be, heavier than in most other states?
That's a good question. That we have a fee schedule, and you have the UR, utilization review, independent medical review process that's in place, which has kept some of the costs under control. And so in any system, quite frankly, if you do this, if you only do a fee schedule, the system will overutilize. If you only do utilization review, then the costs will go up because of the individual costs. We have both the UR, the utilization review, limit to the number of visits and the kinds of visits, as well as the fee schedule in place. And so those have not necessarily been it, but there are some exceptions. There's some abuses that are going on some of the providers with chronic pain questions and other things that don't have consistent fee schedules or utilization review processes in place. And so these are kinds of some of the things that are going on. The med legal process is the fee schedule went up in about 3 years ago now. I think it was almost this time of the year. And the attempt was to increase the rates by 25%, and it went up more than 50%. So these are some of the things that are going on.
Always appreciated, Bill. Really do. You're so well versed and always keeping up with everything that's going out there. So we're really grateful for that. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for letting me spend the time with you. It's a delight to see both of you again. You know, one of the things that I always enjoy is watching your enjoyment of how you two work together, and you know, the laughter and the true love that I see going on is really neat. So it's good to be part of the program here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We love you just as much. So thank you so much for being our guest today, and trying our best to unpack a really complex conversation.
California is complex. I'll agree to that one.
So if there's one takeaway you want to leave with our listeners, what would it be about California? So like you said, there's people where us old guys talk about this a lot, that, you know, we're seeing or needing younger people to come into the system. So what's your one piece of advice for somebody coming into the system that's fresh and they're trying to learn about California?
I wouldn't say it's just California. I say nationwide, and that is the right care at the right time is the best for the injured workers and the employers in terms of controlling costs. And what you have to do is focus in on finding out what the injured worker really needs and get to know them as a person and find out what they really need in order to take great care of them. And that's part of the challenge, is you don't actually go out and sit down with them anymore. Back in the day when I was a baby claims adjuster before I started shaving, I went out and met these people. And right now there's a whole generation or two even that have never met the injured workers, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to treat them as individuals, as human beings. You have to be very respectful. And it's much harder to do that just trying to do it over a Zoom or over a phone call. And that's part of the challenge. But the bottom line is great care, great medical care, respect, honesty. When you say you're going to do something, do it. You know, be available and be there for the injured worker. And that is part of what really we have to do as an industry. Just a side note, though, real anecdotal story. At the last one of the conferences I went to a little while ago, I was talking to the defense attorneys, and every one of them was saying, I can't get a hold of a single claims adjuster. I try, and I can't. And at the same time, I talked to 3 different claims offices, and they were telling me all the programs they had in place that made sure that every phone call got to a live person. And I was thinking, you know, we have a little bit of a discrepancy going on here. We have one group saying they never get through, and another group saying they have all these programs that no call is left unanswered. And I'm thinking, I wonder where the truth is on this one. And I wrote an article on the fact that senior management needs to call in once in a while on their helplines or on their phone lines to make sure that, yeah, you really can get through.
Good point. I want to, before I forget about it, Ralph, hold on to your thought, because I was going to make this point when you were talking earlier. One of your quotes, something I heard you say pretty soon after we met initially, and it's always stuck with me, and I repeat it very often. I repeated it on this podcast many times, and I repeated it in other sessions that I've done many times. And the quote is, do the right thing and everybody wins.
Yeah. Again, in the right care at the right time, you're doing the right thing, right? Yep. And it's amazing how well that works. And yet, because of silos and because of misplaced financial incentives, you find a lot of things that aren't happening that could or should be happening. And you have to overcome those identify the silos, identify the misplaced in financial incentives, and fix them.
Very good. Ralph, did you have something else to add?
Bill, you continue to lead us. You write the most remarkable stuff out there. So I want you to remind our listeners, how they can sign up, how they can.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I put out a weekly blog. It comes from Plethy because I work with them as a strategic advisor. And if you'll send me, my email address is wzachry@gmail.com. Send me an email saying you'd like to be on my newsletter, and it's for free. And it's risk management stuff. It's general management stuff. It's workers' comp geekdom stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And it's whatever comes across my desk and what I'm seeing. I try to then turn around and get out the message about what's important and what can be done.
It's awesome, Bill. Keep doing it. We're all learning. We're all appreciative of your leadership because you really are. You're giving us, we're all thinking about the same stuff. It's nice to see it from your angle, from your perspective. So congratulations on that. I love it. Thanks for sending that out.
It takes a little bit of work to stay up with all the numbers I gave you are pretty accurate and timely. And so I end up reading a lot of the rating bureau's actuarial reports and stuff like that I find fascinating, but I know most people will get a good night's sleep from. So,
well, thank you, Bill. We really appreciate you. And listeners, I know you've heard me say this time and time again. I really do try to keep our episodes short in around 30 minutes. We've gone way past that today. And hopefully you will understand this is the reason why when you get really, really smart people on the podcast to talk with you, it's just, you don't want to not have them talk because everything that comes out of their mouth is super smart and super meaningful.
Absolutely right.
Again, you're being more than gracious on this. Thank you.
All right. Well, until we see you, which I hope is soon, Bill, I know you're traveling soon, so have wonderful travels. And until next time, hasta luego.
You bet. Thanks a lot.